The Witness, Featherine, and Cosmic Armor Superman. These three characters represent the epitome of narrative manipulation as well as out-of-versal scaling. Those are the two most untouched tiers of power scaling, so it is here that I'm going to give you, the viewers, a way to deal with these scaling tiers. So let's classify some versions of narrative manipulation so you guys know the standard going into the video. First, let's start with dimension-based narrative manipulation. Dimension-based narrative manipulation works on the level of basically human level up to infinite dimensional. Narrative manipulation of the dimensional nature means that you can manipulate any and all parts of the cosmology from within the boundaries of that high hyperversal or lower spaces. To explain dimension-based narrative manip, I'll give you the very basic Cliff Notes summary. Dimension-based narrative manipulation is where you have manipulation of the cosmology and the narrative event or events within it. Typically, you'll have motions of the stories changing, the stories being rewritten. Maybe there's a retcon, maybe there's a soft reboot or a hard reboot, hence the term retcon. Maybe there's a law manipulation, maybe there's a variation of time or space, or maybe there's a variation of subjective reality being used in play, and you're unable to recognize it from within the bounds of the story. However, it's never stated anywhere that it's beyond the concepts of space and time, or beyond essentially conception. The other version is what I call metaphysical narrative manipulation. Now, to be clear, like other hacks powers, it does not have to be out-of-versal to be metaphysical. But I'm going to use this word as a strict categorical term for the basis of the video. Metaphysical narrative manipulation is where you take any of the 4 tiers of metaphysics and you apply the narrative meta to that level. A narrative concept would be a concept of which is a story and of its creation. A law would be a narrative law or rule within the book that must always be followed. A narrative system means the organization of how that story is made. And then the axiom narrative manipulation would be the very ideas of which the story comes from. There's a level beyond this called ontological narrative manipulation, but it still exists within the domain of axioms. Ontological-based narrative manipulation is a form of manipulation where you take the word ontology, which means the basis of all things, the word that defines existence itself, and determines the kind of existence along with all things. Beyond that existence, that needs to be determined as an ontology. When you're given a name, date, subject, identity, idea, you are given coldness, sickness, it doesn't really matter. That's now a part of your ontology. A narrative ontology is where you create a narrative writing that has an ontological reality established within it, such as the book having the ontological narrative of this character always winning in the story, such as a hero archetype. We're not scaling the hero's journey to ontologically narrative, but we are saying that something like a hero's archetype could be an ontological narrative as long as you have statements of such, due to the fact that the hero will always be archetypally written to win and achieve their purpose in the story, which is to defeat the villain. As noted by my friend Crimbus in his Levels of the Multiverse video, you don't need philosophical-based arguments or philosophical-based evidence in order to scale stuff to high outerversal/extraversal/boundless, even though the last 2 terms I just said are trash terms. What Crimbus argues in his video is for something called model realism. That's not a part of this video, but do note that there are instances, such as say in something like SCP, where you can have model realism apply narrative manipulation on a scale such as that one. Now that we know how to classify a narrative manipulation, how do we apply it? So, To apply narrative manipulation, the first thing to understand is you're only limited by the evidence that the series provides to you on how you can scale it. So if there's no narrative scaling, it's completely moot. But if there's levels of narrative scaling that you want to define, okay, stay with me here. Narrative manipulation is the base level of the three. In narrative manipulation, that alone gives you ability to manipulate your universe, everything beyond conception, or the story. There are levels to narrative manipulation, however, it's not so defined as to what levels they are so much as you can only get that from the series that you're scaling in particular. The only thing I have to say here is a lot of things are mistaken for narrative manipulation when there's no evidence for such. Narrative manipulation is very finicky and very fickle. Frankly, that's always how narrative manipulations worked, but now that you know, it's good to know. The next level to this is meta-narrative. A meta-narrative is where you interact with a meta-concept. To understand what meta means, let me just give you a different example. Say you have a box and it contains a set of objects. Each of these set of objects are all a fictional universe. These fictional universes are all within that box. This box is something called a metafiction. A metafiction contains all those series inside the box, not just the series that character is from. A meta-narrative is where you have a multi-layered narrative that is not only multi-layered but is all-encompassing of the story directly. This includes the series and all other series that it can manipulate, but that doesn't mean that the series that they're in right now, they can just openly get out of the comic or the story and just leave. To manipulate a meta-narrative just simply means that you're able to manipulate not just your series, but a multi-layered version of your series along with other series. A metafiction is where you take the box of that set of series that I just talked about in that previous example. A metafiction is where you can manipulate the box that contains all of those series. An example from Destiny is, well, Destiny. Destiny scales the highest within the cosmology that includes all the Bungie games. So let's review before I move on to the case study of the video. With narrative level, there's two things to establish for it. You need to establish the potency from which you choose from narrative, meta-narrative, or metafiction. The other thing to establish of narrative would be the scaling. You can have dimension-based narrative manipulation, or basically what you see from a DACA box, or you can have your pick of the various metaphysical manipulations of the narrative scaling, anywhere from concept all the way to axiom or ontology. So, narrative as a tier is actually very flexible with how you can apply this scaling in a very similar manner to concepts. I suppose something else to note before I continue is that I would have referenced Zeno as well as Goku in my case study. However, I felt that Dragon Ball, due to the fact that it's mostly multiversal in canon, maybe 5D, and then you have Dragon Ball Heroes being infinite 5D to 6D, infinite 6D, they just weren't worth mentioning because they get winked to crap, and whoever tells you that Dragon Ball is out-of-versal, besides maybe some stuff from Heroes, I could accept that. But ignoring Heroes, if anyone's telling you about canon Dragon Ball being out-of-versal, they're snorting a hunk of crap, and I want some of that crap. Alright, let's move on to the case study. Before I continue, pause the video and tell me who you think wins this encounter. And also, tell me what you think about Goku vs. Superman Round 3. Because in my personal opinion, it wasn't bad, the animation was okay, but Universal Plus, Multiversal, Immeasurable Speed, okay, neat. I felt like there was a lot of downplay for both sides, however. Anyway, moving on to the case study. Cosmic Armor Superman, or as some know him to be, the Thought Machine / Thought Robot, Featherine Augustus Aura, and the Witness. All three of these characters are out-of-versal, and all three of these characters have either meta-narrative or metafictional manipulation. They all seem rather similar from the onset, so how can we make this easy to understand for the average viewer? First, let's get to the point. Over 60 to 70% of their powers, maybe even 80%, they're all the same. So we can just eliminate 15 minutes worth of conversation that you already know and don't need to hear again and again and again. So that's neat. What about the remaining 40 to 30% of those powers? So, let's see. They all have law manipulation. That's pretty busted. They all have subjective reality. That's also pretty busted. They all obviously have reality warping, not just subjective reality, so that's pretty useful. They all interact with truth manipulation in one way, shape, or form to the extent that truth as a concept is below them, so that's also useful. So, what are we left with exactly? Good question. When I power scale out-of-versal characters who may or may not also have narrative manip, I look for a set of other categories to scale those characters, which may or may not follow the same set of rules lower tier characters follow. The first thing I look for is how much content does that character have, because if we're doing a God versus God debate, we have to see the content volume for the character being presented. I don't need to know all 1,000 plus documents just to know the scaling for that character, but to know that there's a lot of evidence for that character scaling high means I can for sure, without a doubt, scale them pretty high. One reason why I want to talk about this is because of the function Cosmic Armor Superman poses in his story. I mentioned before that Cosmic Armor Superman has narrative manipulation. Let me explain it. He is able to interact with Mandrak, who at the time was going to essentially drain the blood from the entire story and make it bleed into him, hence the cool vampire theme. The Cosmic Armor robot was made to take on Mandrak and seal up the hole that was the narrative of DC at the time. The problem is, Cosmic Armor Superman functions as a piece of DC narrative. This means that when he's specifically created to be the stopping point for Final Crisis, that means him being all the stories for Final Crisis does not allow him to continue to scale any further down the road. This means the events of Post-Crisis, Rebirth, Infinite Frontier. You can't scale Cosmic Armor Superman to the high tiers, or specifically all the high tiers from the later runs, because he's only the collection of stories of DC up until the point which is Superman Beyond, Comic 1 and Comic 2. This means we have a firm cap for someone like Cosmic Armor Superman. Because his adaptation is not at all unique, Featherine and the Witness also have adaptation, we cannot use that as a factor. Another thing to keep in mind for Cosmic Armor Superman is there is a limit to his regeneration, and he's going to meet his limit well before the Witness and Featherine meet theirs. So as a result, we put Cosmic Armor Superman, due to him basically being lacking, for the lack of better words, no pun intended, he's going in third place. Now, the debate comes down to the Witness versus Featherine. The Witness is connected to every piece of Destiny content available, and Featherine is outright the god of Umaneko. Well, there is certain restrictions, like if she takes off her crown and becomes too powerful, she can ascend to the creator domain and lose her identity. So, that's a weakness for her to keep in mind. The Witness has no such limitations on how powerful he can get. So, that's one thing we'll use to separate the two. Another thing to keep in mind is the Witness has lost to people before in terms of intellectual domination. Rasputin managed to turn an assassination attempt into something that is thwarting an invasion from Xivu or Wrath and stopping the Witness from invading Earth right then and there. We know how the Witness works with people who is more intelligent than, and we have more demonstrations from Destiny on how the intellectual war goes between all the smart characters. So I can make statements about the Witness being pretty intelligent. Featherine in particular has written the narrative of at least everything below her, all the stories, and she sees all of them as garbage to her. So I'm sure she knows a lot as well, is very hacksy because she has all the hacks of the verse, at least for the witches, in her disposal. She knows a lot about how to use her powers in particular, I'm sure, and she's done what she's done for a very long time, which is to continue writing stories or to go and be the witch of the theater. So this one sounds like an odd God versus God debate. How do we solve this one? Besides the Witness not having a cap on how much stronger they can get, another thing we can mention is due to the fact that the Witness has access to ontological scaling, as in the highest level of outerversal possible that you can grant to a character, which by the way you cannot go above outerversal. Whoever says you can go above outerversal is snorting a hunk of drugs. And I don't want any part of that because they're snorting a hunk of drugs. For the Witness, I would easily put them above Featherine because if you compare Destiny to Umineko, the Witness has done far more complex forms of manipulation against the entire cast. So besides intelligence as well as tactics, we can outright just give him scaling. Ontology has been a thing in Destiny forever. Umineko does not have statements of ontology. So, therefore, here's the tier list. Cosmic Armor Superman is in third place due to, frankly, a lacking set of tools which led to his death, let's be honest. Second place is Featherine because she has far more content than Cosmic Armor Superman. And not only does she have far more content, but she scales a lot higher with her content, whereas say Cass is much more limited within the scope of DC compared to Featherine, and the Witness has far less restrictions compared to Featherine and also scales a lot higher, and not only in terms of power but intellectual domination as well. Anyway, that's my thoughts about narrative in a nutshell. If you want to know more stuff about narrative, please let me know, and I might do a video on it. Otherwise, let me know if you want to see me and Lumos make a video on, I don't know, Cosmic Armor Superman versus the Witness or something, because I know Cosmic Armor Superman gets a lot of buzz. Anyway, have a good one, y'all. My name is Nothing Important here, and I hope y'all have a good one. Peace.